The damage had been inflicted on Berlin and most industrial cities in the Reich. But the spirit of the German people remained unbroken. At the beginning of October 1944, the Allies launched their first full-scale attack on the German West Wall defences around Aachen. And by the 21st of October, the first German city had fallen to the Allies. However, the German defences were formidable, and this inspired the Germans further. Hitler was planning a counterstrike. The Allied lines were spread thinly in some areas, and he decided on a second attack through the Ardennes. He expected his forces to achieve the element of surprise, break through Allied lines and advance to capture the port of Antwerp. The generals were highly sceptical.
Sepp Dietrich, commanding 6th Panzer Army, one of Hitler's most loyal supporters, went on record as saying that all Hitler wanted him to do was to cross a river and then go on to take Antwerp with reformed divisions made up of kids and old men and at Christmas, and this through the worst part of the Ardennes in the worst possible weather.
In the fog on the 16th of November, the attack was launched, preceded by artillery fire as well as V-1 and V-2 launches. Half the forces available to the Germans on the Western Front poured out of the Ardennes forest. The 5th Panzer Army penetrated 60 miles into the American lines on a 30-mile wide front. The 2nd Panzer Division reached within 4 miles of the River Meuse. The attack created a bulge in the Allied lines, giving the Ardennes offensive its name for posterity, the Battle of the Bulge. The Americans were initially taken by surprise and were slow to counterattack. As the Germans rushed forward, American units were trapped in the town of Bastogne. When an American surrender was demanded, Brigadier Anthony McAuliffe ensured his place in history with a single-word reply: nuts.
The unusual thing about the Battle of the Bulge is that history is full of cases of brave, ambitious attacks which nobody thought could possibly succeed and which did. But this was a brave and ambitious attack that the senior commanders on both sides, once they knew about it, said couldn't possibly succeed, and it didn't. It was Hitler's last gamble. The idea, insofar as it was ever going to work, was a political one. What was defeating Germany was the combination of trying to fight the Soviet Union, the United States, and the British Empire simultaneously. The Germans believed they had no chance of a compromise peace with the Soviet Union, and I think they were right, which meant that there was only the possibility of breaking the Anglo-American alliance. The concept behind the Battle of the Bulge was if they could defeat the American forces in their first attack, they would isolate and surround the British forces to the east of Antwerp, and this political shock might have been enough to break the Anglo-American alliance and to lead to some kind of compromise peace in the West.
They held on at Bastogne until reinforcements arrived on the 26th of December. By now, the German supply lines were overstretched, and they were running out of fuel. On the 3rd of January 1945, the Allies counterattacked, and 5 days later the Germans withdrew. Hitler's last gamble and the last major offensive of the Third Reich was over.
The result of this is that the Germans have used up their last industrial resources and their last trained troops in making this offensive of December 1944. They have virtually nothing left to stop the offensive on the Eastern Front, which the Soviets open in January 1945, which takes Soviet forces from the river Vistula, on which Warsaw stands, to the river Oder, which is within 50 miles of Berlin, in a matter of weeks.
By now, the Red Army, under Generals Konev and Zhukov, numbered over 2 million soldiers, 6,400 tanks, and 4,600 artillery pieces. They began a sweep across Poland, capturing territory nearly as fast as the Germans had done 6 years earlier. As the Red Army advanced, captured German civilians would face the full horrors of the battlefield. Revenge for the harsh treatment of Russian civilians was cruelly meted out. Thousands of civilians were butchered, tortured, and raped. Colonel Hans von Gluck told the men of the German 125th Regiment, "Forget all the slogans about a 1,000-year Reich and the final victory that must be ours. From now on, we are fighting solely for survival, for our homeland, our wives, mothers and children, whom we want to save from a fate that none of us can imagine." 7th of March, the US 9th Division found the railway bridge at Remagen over the River Rhine to be intact. All other crossings had been destroyed by retreating German troops. This was an important breakthrough. The Allies crossed the natural barrier of the Rhine and started their race to Berlin.
In spring 1945, nobody expected that Germany would be partitioned for almost another 40 years. Most commanders on all sides were thinking simply in terms of getting the war over. The Soviet Union, however, had a better appreciation of the political aspects of needing to dominate Eastern Europe. So for Stalin, Berlin was a target. For the Western Allies, increasingly dominated by the forces of the United States, this was not true. Having agreed a halt line along the River Elbe with the Soviet Union, the Americans and the British were scrupulous in sticking to it, and also there was some concern about the possibility of a German last stand in what Goebbels' propaganda was calling the Alpine Redoubt. This turned out to be a propaganda fiction, no military threat whatsoever, but it was taken seriously enough at the time to cause a diversion of forces towards the south. But in purely military terms, the main concern of the Western Allies at least was to bring the war to a safe conclusion by linking up with Soviet forces without the risk of actually opening fire on them, which is always a very real possibility when Allies meet, and to end the war and go home.
On the 25th of April, American and Soviet troops met 70 miles southwest of Berlin. The death throes of the Third Reich were almost over. Hitler was by now in his underground command bunker in Berlin. Russian and Allied shells rained down on the devastated city as the final act of the Reich was being played out. Hitler had ordered the destruction of all infrastructure in Germany, stating, "If the war is lost, the people will be lost also. It is not necessary to worry about what the German people will need for survival. On the contrary, it is best for us to destroy even these things. For this nation has proved itself to be the weaker, and the future belongs solely to the Eastern nation. In any case, only the inferior will remain after the struggle, for the good have already been killed." On the 29th of April, he married his long-time mistress, Eva Braun. Just before 3:30 p.m. on Monday, the 30th of April, Hitler and his new wife calmly took poison and shot themselves. The Führer finally joined the tens of millions that died in the war that he himself had started. Hitler had decreed that Karl Dönitz was to be the new German leader. He decided to end the war as quickly as possible. At 2:41 a.m. on the 7th of May, the unconditional surrender of all German forces on all fronts was signed. The war in Europe was over, and the Third Reich was consigned to history forever.
Now, General Kinsall will sign next.
It is sometimes asked if the Germans were so very good at fighting battles, how it was they came to lose the Second World War. And the answer is that they lost the war because they devoted so much effort to being very good at fighting battles. They concentrated their best forces, their training, their entire military philosophy into winning on the battlefield. They were poor at the critical areas of military intelligence, of finding out about the enemy, of military logistics, which is supply and transport, and particularly in strategy. Time and time again, they bungle their strategic decisions. Hitler's decision to attack the Soviet Union before Britain is defeated, leading to a two-front war, and in particular the decision to declare war on the United States in December 1941, are strategic errors of the very first magnitude, and they are not the only ones the Germans make. So, they are very good on the battlefield, but they cannot translate battlefield victory into success in war.
But the greatest horrors of the Third Reich only became fully apparent after the war. The systematic murder of millions of people in Germany and the occupied territories. Nazi persecution of the Jews had started before they took power. However, from 1933, the persecution escalated beyond all belief. The Nazis' original plan was to forcibly repatriate Jews and other non-Aryan minorities. As Germany conquered Europe, millions more Jews would come under the Nazis' jurisdiction, and it was obvious that repatriation was impractical. As Germany occupied territories, the death squads of the SS Einsatzgruppen would follow to round up Jews, opponents, and all other undesirables. Many would be summarily shot. In one day alone at Babi Yar, near Kiev, 33,371 men, women and children were shot by these squads. Yet shooting was not effective enough for the slaughter that the Nazis planned. Himmler's deputy, Reinhard Heydrich, was the man credited as the architect of the final solution. He engineered the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Jews from occupied lands to forced labor concentration camps spread across the Reich. Trains packed full of starving Jews, gypsies and undesirables took their human cargoes to newly established camps where the machinery of the final solution was being perfected. Vast killing machines were being set up to cleanse the Reich of the Jewish problem. Many methods of execution were tried, but it was finally decided that an insecticide, Zyklon B, was the most efficient means of slaughter. As the victims arrived, they were first sorted out. Skilled workers would be put to work at the camp. The rest were ordered to undress, remove any valuables, and report to the showers for delousing. They were herded into tiled chambers. When there was no more room, the door was shut, and small pellets of Zyklon B were dropped in from the roof. After about 20 minutes, everyone in the room would be dead. From there, the corpses would be taken to massive crematoria, where they were reduced to ashes. The scale of the killing was immense. An estimated 6 million Jews were killed, as well as millions of other unfortunate souls. Grisly experiments were carried out on other victims, and hundreds of thousands of people were worked to death in labor camps. As Germany faced defeat, the SS, who were entrusted with the final solution, tried to hide the evidence. Himmler ordered an end to the killings, and many of the gas chambers were destroyed. On the 27th of January, on a beautiful sunny day, the Russians arrived at the concentration camp at Auschwitz. The sight that greeted them would shock the world. The Holocaust that killed 15 million innocent people is, even today, beyond comprehension. Goering and Himmler would cheat justice by committing suicide. Heydrich had been assassinated in 1942. Trials at Nuremberg would dispense justice to a few of the guilty. But many war criminals would escape justice altogether. Just over 12 years of Nazi rule will live forever as a monument to the depths that mankind will sink. A warning from history that has still not been heeded.